from that, the work that you did, then the book came along, the first, the few, the only. I've been reading it, really enjoyed it, and I love this concept of taking power back, because I think in the world there are so many situations where people feel powerless, and part of the reason why I started doing the podcast is that it's that whole reframing the situation. And I love a line that you came up with. I was watching one of your interviews with Ra Goddess and somebody else, and it's that thing about you don't want to, is it need a client more than you want it? And I think that, and I think that applies across the board, whether it's to your job, whether it's to your partner, or it's like you can't be so invested and need that person, that thing so much that you can't walk away. And I think a lot of companies, they're relying on that situation, that you need this job and you're desperate. And I think if you can reframe the situation and make sure that, okay, maybe you have a nest egg on the side, or you are so highly skilled that if push comes to shove, you can move away, then I think it just flips that whole power dynamic on its head. And so when you're speaking to your boss or whoever it is, that, okay, they can potentially treat me badly for like a short-term period, but in the long run, they just can't do that because I can walk. I mean, what do you think, Deepa?
I think that that's really changed, right? I think the fact that, people stay in their jobs less than ever before, I think with COVID and the great resignation, I think that's also changed. So I completely agree with that. I think we're in a moment where people feel comfortable that there are other opportunities available to them. And if something isn't right, maybe they can't leave today, but they're going to leave like in 90 days, that's as long as it's taking people to find roles now. So I think it's a really interesting time to be an employee and to be really clear about what your boundaries are and what you need. I talk about in the book this sitting down with a senior partner when I was new, and he said every couple of years go through the interview process at another company just to know your worth and to know that you can. And the advice you're talking about is from one of my mentors. It's my favorite business advice, and he said, "Yeah, never need a client or want a more than you want a client." And we were talking about a particular client, but I do think it applies to life. And I think part of what my work is about is in meeting all these women. So now I've met thousands of women of color. I think there's also a lot that we're taught consciously and unconsciously. So I think as a children of immigrants, a lot of us were taught like security is important, just stay in the job, just be quiet, just put up with it. Like that sort of setup, as an example, is just one example, makes us stay in situations that don't work for us. And so I think we are in a moment that where more than ever, I would say, especially in the US, like that women of color right now are getting calls left and right. The women in information are getting calls weekly for other opportunities. And so if cultures don't treat them correctly, there is more opportunity than ever to walk away. And I think also there's also now more opportunity and interest in creating our own businesses that work for us too. So if corporate culture, regardless of where you go, is not going to work, well, then we'll go create our own. So yeah, we're in a moment where I think businesses are having to reckon with what does it mean, because more employees are willing to do what they need to take care of themselves.
But I also think sort of going forward, I think having that mindset of, I am the asset, I am the talent that is producing the revenue. I think if you can change the way you view yourself, almost say yourself as a company, as a startup, I'm actually loaning my services to the company. So rather than having that sort of master-servant relationship, you have much more agency and control. And Absolutely. I think the problem for a lot of people is they just don't feel it's a lack of control, isn't it, to some extent?
Absolutely. And I think that's how the model was set up, right? So much of my work is about the structural challenges. It's less about, what we need to do as individuals, although there's things we need to do. But I think there's been denial till date that the system itself is set up to exploit, right? That the system is set up to take advantage. The system is set up so that we overwork and we overtry and, we get sick and all of those things. And so I do think we're in a moment where there's a lot of rethinking about bigger conversations, to your point, and what does it mean? And like, what's the, one of my favorite questions right now is like, what's the space that work should take in our lives, right? Like so many of us have make our lives work around work, but that's so backwards to, if you really think about it and sit and think about it, that's not how the world should work. And that's not how things worked like 50 years ago. Like somehow in the last 50 years, things have really shifted to this frenzy where work is taking over our lives. And who does that serve? And is that really the right direction that we should be heading? Is I think really where I find like the real weight of the question.